Hello and welcome back to the Winterthur Podcast. Did you know Winterthur has a world-class library with everything from archival photographs to ephemera, including letters between Jacqueline Kennedy and Henry Francis DuPont, to an American first edition of Jane Austen's Emma. For this episode, in honor of Black History Month, we're delving into Winterthur Library's collection to discuss the Craig family, a 19th and 20th century Black family living in Delaware and New Jersey through the ephemera they left behind. Ephemera are objects originally meant to last only for a short time, such as newspapers, receipts, bus tickets, etc. We are joined by Allie Alvis, Winterthur's curator of special collections. Thank you for joining us, Allie. Can you tell us who the Craig family was?
Thank you very much for having me on. So the Craig family were 3 generations of a Black family, like you said, living in Wilmington, Delaware, and Salem, New Jersey. The patriarch of the family was George Washington Craig, who lived from 1811 to 1889. In the archives and in the collections and documents, he's usually called Washington. He was a free Black man who progressed through the business world in the 19th century. Washington was listed as a laborer in the 1850 census, but later as a steward in the 1860 census. A steward was somebody who procured things for people and businesses. This aligns with one of the earliest documents in the Craig archive, a confirmation of Washington's purchase of a shop in 1857. Washington married his wife Hester in 1837. And the ceremony was conducted by prominent abolitionist Reverend Charles W. Dennison. There are not many references to the Craigs' social lives in the archives, so this offers an important glimpse of their circle and their association with the abolitionist cause. It is especially notable because Delaware was a slave state, with over 1,700 enslaved people recorded in the 1860 census. Participating in abolitionist causes would have been dangerous for a Black family at this time. Washington and Hester had 6 children, the first of whom was also named George Washington, but would most often be called George. By 1875, Washington had progressed from steward to shop owner. He owned and operated a cigar shop in Wilmington from 1875 to 1878, and then he got into the fish business. There's a great anecdote in an 1881 edition of the Wilmington newspaper about him catching a 4-pound eel in the Christiana River. Washington instilled a good business sense in his son George, who owned a shop in Salem, New Jersey by 1885. George also worked as a steward, and the archive contains a few receipts for goods purchased for steamships. This includes black tea, 5 dozen eggs, a half-gallon of vinegar, peaches, peas, and mustard, and another receipt notes the purchase of 20 yards of table linen, dozens of plates of different sizes, and sugar bowls. George married his wife Lavinia in 1877, and they had 12 children. They bought a house at 53 Hedge Street in New Jersey in 1880. And by 1907, the family owned 5 properties on Hedge Street, which they rented out to other members of the Black community. George died in 1905, but Lavinia retained ownership of the properties. The archive contains tax, insurance, and renovation documents for them through 1935. There are unfortunately fewer records of George and Lavinia's children in the archive, with one notable exception: their son B.A.'s membership card to the NAACP, dated 1933. Something particularly moving about this collection is that although the majority of it consists of straightforward receipts for a variety of goods and services, it still conveys emotion, particularly in the records of the deaths of Washington and Hester. Included are receipts for a grave plot, which Washington purchased some 20 years before they died. And then in 1881 and 1889, receipts for coffins, embalming, and hearse services for first Hester and then Washington. A manuscript obituary for Hester, written by a sister in the Hand-in-Hand Lodge to which she belonged, remembered her as having a smile for all and a kind word for everyone.
Can you tell us a bit about the Craig archive?
So the Craig Family Archive was purchased from an archives dealer in 1999 to expand the library's important holdings of materials related to the business people of Wilmington and the surrounding area. It's part of an effort to tell the stories of everyday people in America, not just the stories of people who had the means and/or social standing to have scholarship written about them already. The Craig Archive offers a glimpse into the experiences, joys, and struggles of a Black family, a story which is very underrepresented in most histories of the region and in the library's collection. The kinds of things in the archive include receipts, letters, photographs, more receipts, even more receipts. The Craig family was very careful about retaining all of their receipts for things that they paid for and purchased both for themselves and for their businesses, which really paints a great picture of this family at this time.
What's the historical context for these kinds of materials?
So, although it is ripe with receipts, the Craig Family Archive unfortunately doesn't record every aspect of its members' lives. We can infer a community involvement from papers relating to AME churches and Washington, Hester, and George's membership in Black Masonic orders. We can also see a generational thread of involvement in civil rights movements, from Washington and Hester's association with Reverend Charles B. Dennison to B.A. Craig's membership in the NAACP. His 1933 membership was during a period when the organization sought a federal anti-lynching ban. The lynching of George White occurred in Wilmington in 1903, just 7 miles from where Washington operated his cigar shop in the 1870s. The social climate in Wilmington when Washington was establishing himself in the business world and starting a family was fraught for Black Americans. Documentarian Stephen Lebowski called Wilmington north of the South, but south of the North. The area was commercially aligned with the industry of the North, but had a lot of the socially normalized racism and discriminatory attitudes of the South. While it is not immediately evident in the papers of the Craig family, it is important to remember the challenges that they faced in order to simply exist, let alone thrive.
What's the most interesting thing you found in this archive?
I think the archive as a whole is interesting as a survival, in that, as I mentioned, the library doesn't have a lot of primary records of Black business owners in this area. But I think my favorite part is the collection of negatives and photographs included in the receipts and documents. Most of this material, unfortunately, doesn't have names associated with the people in the photographs, but they're deeply personal and evocative. There are scenes of groups of friends collecting seashells and sponges by the shore, hiking in the woods, and taking goofy pictures. There's a great tintype photograph of a young woman named R.A. McDuffie in an early 20th century swimming suit, mounted in a frame of cupids and captioned, "Lovingly yours." One of my favorite pictures is a little boy posed in a photography studio with his hand on an absolutely massive book. There are also several pictures of people holding dogs and stiff posed images that wouldn't look out of place in a first day of school photo set on Facebook. The photographs put faces to the Craig Family Archive, amplifying all of the emotions and information it contains. It makes it not just an important historical record, but a deeply personal fragment of 3 generations of a Black American family.
Thank you so much for telling us this fascinating story of the Craig family through objects from our library's collection. Winterthur's library collection contains loads of ephemera that allow us to peek into days of yore. You can see all of the objects mentioned in this episode at the Winterthur Library. Learn more at winterthur.org/library. Be sure to follow us on social media to see the objects mentioned in this episode, and subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening.